Hello, welcome to Mapping Global China Conversations. Today, we are honored to have this conversation with Dr. Lola Woetzel to talk about China's business involvement in the world and also the urban development of China and how it has impact on global urban development and our imagination of what the future of cities would be like. So welcome, Dr. Woetzel.
Thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So, visiting professor of Global China Studies and Business at NYU. Very happy to be here. 40 years in China, 39 years with McKinsey, and I focus on cities and have led our practice in China and around the world. Also one of the directors formerly of the McKinsey Global Institute, which is our research organization.
I think we will have a lot to talk about China and also other aspects of China. So the first question I want to ask you is, as a senior partner emerita of McKinsey, and also you've been here for 30 years, over 30 years. I can't imagine what China was like in the early 1990s, but you already been involved in the business world and also consulting world. What is your most memorable case you dealt with back then, and why it is different, and what makes it so memorable and transformative in your experience?
Well, it's hard to pick. It's like asking to, select your favorite child. They're all special in their own way, and all these projects and these experiences have their uniqueness. But of course, some stand out for different reasons. And so, to pick one, the redevelopment of Nanjing Road, which was something that we did in the early 2000s. I want to say that it might have been late 90s, and it was the first of its kind to essentially reimagine the road, which are the 3-kilometer section of the road that stemmed from the Bund and the waterfront to People's Square. And it was a first in many ways. It was the first time I'd done anything like that. It was the first time I had worked with the Chinese government, in the local government, in sort of an actual project setting, where we were getting paid and we were doing things. And so that was different than doing research or something. And it was something that I could really see the implications of what the project was all about, which was, in this case, turning something that was successful, there were 1 million people per day on the street, but was clearly needing something more to take it to whatever the next thing would be. And there was more competition, and the government was concerned about the revenues, and people were sort of grumpy because it was too crowded. And so all of that just said, we need a new idea, a fresh way of thinking about it. And that was fun. That was really fun. 9 months of work, a bit of global sort of benchmarking, a lot of very hard-hitting kind of, we say 照镜子, sort of look in the mirror kind of stuff. This is what you have, and it's not good in this area. This is your strength. And then, a lot of creation around creating a new set of a vision and a concept for that area, which has been implemented. So.
Interesting. When was that, the development of Nanjing Road?
Well, there are 3 sections to it. It's roughly 2.5 kilometers. And so essentially is from the Bund. So the first section is the section from the Bund to roughly Henan Road, which is the old buildings. So that's historic Shanghai. Yes. This is the Shanghai that everybody thinks of when they see the pictures of the Bund. It's the old buildings. But they were occupied by by central government enterprises. They were falling down. In some cases, it hadn't been really well maintained. The quality of the service in the hotels was sort of pretty poor. So there's a lot of let's fix it and let's pedestrianize it. Let's sort of make it walkable. And then they have the middle section. The middle section is the section from Henan Road roughly to Xizanglu. And that is the cosmopolitan Shanghai. Yes. That's the today version. That's the shopping, basically. Okay. and that was just massively, traffic. There was no place to sit down. There was no parks. There was no green. All the side streets were all jammed. And again, the stores were largely state enterprises, so it's not the best. So that was about let's reimagine the built environment, and then have more places for people to sit and better quality of services and retail and so forth. And then you have the final section, which is from Xizanglu all the way to People's Park. And that, in a sense, we sort of call that the future to Shanghai. That is the opening up of the future, because it was all about, you have some museums, and you have the People's Square, the Shanghai Museum, and there's open parks. It was a bit unplanned in that sense, gives people a little bit of breathing room. And we have the thing that I was perhaps most proud of is that we used to have this horrible green overpass on Xizanglu, which was this monster kind of like, metal contraption that periodically things would fall off of it, or people. It's just sort of very, very difficult. And so we looked at it and said, it's a barrier. You clearly can't have flow. So can we get rid of it? And so the only way to get rid of it was to have a tunnel. And then we had a huge fight with the engineers, because they were all basically saying that you can't do that. There's too many pipes. It's too close to the metro station. By the Bailian, the Yibai department store was very upset. But we kept pushing and pushing and pushing, said that you have to have this in order to create a road, because otherwise you have this massive barrier there. And anyway, finally we win. And now I can see it. You can really feel how it has changed the traffic flow, and I like to think, I explain to my kids, what is it that I do, and I use that example. So before me there was an overpass, now there's an underpass. So this was our work. So that was the project.
That's a great project. It also helps me understand Shanghai better, and also because we're talking about China and the world, and you have just said that it's not only China's influence on the world, but also how China has been influenced by the world.
Yeah.
So doing this project, have you drawn any inspirations from other global cities?
Oh, of course. No, I was just thinking about that. So, yeah, I mean, initially, of course, this being Shanghai, of course, they want a benchmark. They want to sort of like, we wanted to, so they said, who do you suggest? And this was, again, back in the 90s. So Shanghai GDP per capita was somewhere maybe 15,000 and 12,000. So, so you thought, I don't know, Prague or, Warsaw or something. Central European, and they looked at it and said, no, you don't get it. Think Paris, Champs-Élysées, Fifth Avenue, Miracle Mile. That's where we want to go, and Monte Napoleone or whatever. So yeah, they wanted world class, and it's like, but that was the Shanghai aspiration. They said no, we were the Paris of the Orient, and now we want to become our own thing. So those lessons, that was the Jiaojinzi. Say, well, that's what these guys do. They have this kind of selection, they have this kind of history, et cetera, et cetera. The one exception to this being, we had a French guy who was on the team. He would always talk about the Champs-Élysées. And so one time he was with the government people, and he was saying, you have all the ingredients here to be the new Champs-Élysées, to reimagine, but except for one thing. It's like Champs-Élysées is very high class, refined, elegant. And you have all this neon, and it's bright red and golden, and it's very cheap and tacky. You should take it down. And the Shanghainese looked at him and says, no, we like the neon. The neon shows we're happy, we're prosperous, it's a Shanghai thing. So it was kind of like, we want to become world class, but we don't want to lose our Shanghainese-ness. And I thought that was kind of fun.
And also the neons of Shanghai today becomes part of the narrative of techno-Orientalism.
Exactly.
Right? It's the futuristic type of image of how Shanghai is the future instead of the past. So that's something
it's really integral. Now the drone stuff is very, very cool. Instead of flying around, you can rearrange your visual landscapes and just press of a button.
So I'll move on to the next question. So it's from the early 1990s, and you've been involved in this interesting project. And then China has risen to be one of the great powers. I want to ask you how the dynamics between your work and the China as a rising economic power, how does it shift and how does it reshape the work you've been doing? And also, do you need to reimagine your work, your consulting work, and also your research here in China? And how has it shifted along the way in the past 30 or 40 decades?
Well, so how long do we have? I can go on for
very briefly.
Yeah, no, exactly. This could be a whole, episode or whatever. When I came, of course, that was back in the 80s, and consulting was not new to China. China has had a long history of consultants. Confucius was a consultant.
Yeah, exactly.
What was new to China was management. When I came, it had only been 3 years since the Chinese constitution was written. In 1980. So, and the whole 改革开放 was 1978. It was very, very early. And as a result, there was no management. There were no enterprises. Anything that was there was state-owned, and it wasn't really an enterprise. It was just an asset, and it sort of existed to produce something in that area and didn't run itself as a company. So we were there to essentially proselytize and explain what capitalism was and sort of and how to manage. And that was when you were dealing with engineers and some politicians, mostly engineers, they didn't understand. So you would, make a presentation, and then they would ask you to show them the box. And you say, what box? And you say, well, IBM was here last week, and they had a presentation, and then they brought out a box, and they and then where's your box? We know that you have one. Because we just want to buy the box, and then everything is an engineer's mindset. And so the whole idea of hardware and software and that management was something you could learn and do and change your behavior. That was new. So from that, very early days, of course, we moved on quite a lot. And now, no question, China has evolved its own very robust management ecosystem. And, so there was this period of teaching, and then there was this period of China to the world integrating into China from the multinational perspective. So that was maybe starting in the 2000s and mid-2000s, there was a wave of how do we make China our second home market? How do we integrate all these Chinese capabilities into our global organization? People tried to do that from the multinational side, and from the Chinese side, there was a lot of, let's get rid of some of the old kind of structures. And so we helped transform the state enterprises, did some work there. And then we did a lot of work with multinationals to help them become more integrated into China. And then we had the rise of the private sector, which is, in a sense, the normal economy. Most economy should be private sector. And so we start to see these companies becoming more successful and starting to think about going abroad, but just basic stuff, distribution management, R&D processes, and all that. And now we're into a new phase where it's, of course, with all of the turbulence in the global environment, but also the rise of technology and of Chinese technology. And so, in a sense, it's no longer about sort of integrating China as much as it is sort of taking the advantage of the best that China brings, and from the Chinese side, to integrate the best of the world. And sort of what is it, the thing that we can take and use in the Chinese context and then take it back, go back global. So the globalization engine, I think, is actually, my perspective, really kicking into higher gear now in a different way than it was before.
So in short, it's kind of like China has been more integrated into the world, not only bringing the world the experiences and inspirations from the world, but also feeding back new ideas, new inspirations to
now
the
that's
other
that's I think the era that we're in now. It's the very the greater participation of China in these global ecosystems, whether it's supply chains or R&D, sort of the dialogue around what's the next set of products and standards. Or there are some areas where it's not yet there, clearly, but I think they watch the space and things like global capital flows and let's see what else happens.
And also, I'd like to know from your experiences, for instance, working on the Nanjing Road in Shanghai, which is a major urban development project. How does China's urban growth model compare to other cities you've worked with or studied or lived in? Are there distinct elements in China's urbanization and urban development strategy that stand out to you?
Yes, of course. China is its own thing, and so I think it has taken its quite China-specific approach to this. The couple of things that were different. One was patience, in a sense. It's sort of odd to say that, but for many years, China was under-urbanized. The World Bank would look at it and say, you should take more money and to build more cities. And China would say, no, we're fine. They focused a lot of their development effort on the integration of the countryside and the city. So things like wholesale markets, and that was basically the Chinese model, was you would find a road intersection and you'd stick a warehouse on it and put a blue metal roof on it and then have a bunch of farmers come and start trading, and that would be your city. And it worked. It was extremely effective to mobilize that low, sort of small scale kind of energy, but it was the start. And then we started to see experimentation, and typically that was where China excelled was in this test and learn process to urbanization, that they would quite purposefully try new things in particular places. So the special economic zones, obviously. People sort of always sort of think it was a massive success initially. It was not. We started off with Shenzhen, Xiamen, Shantou, and Zhuhai. And the only Shenzhen worked. The other three were kind of failures for different reasons. But that was all about like, well, let's take a place and let's try new things. Let's give people new ideas, new freedoms. And then let's see what works. And Shenzhen worked. Then they tried new things like building a real estate market. So this is all back in the early days. And that was the characteristic of Chinese urbanization, was only possible because the way in which the government played an active economic role. I mean, as in very directly engaged. So government, it's all government land, first of all. So that's the nature of a communist system in this case. There are very few countries which have had quite such a complete land reform as China did. There are a few, Vietnam, for example, but there are not many. And that gave them essentially a mandate to do something with all of that. So people don't own their land in China, except for some farmers, but a lot of farmers. But in the cities, they own the right to use the land. So he had to set up this whole structure about like, what's the purpose of this land? Which is a very extraordinarily important question that doesn't get asked enough anywhere in the world. And so here in China, it was absolutely required to start with that purpose in mind. What were you going to do with this land? Because you had to zone it for something, and then you had a term for which it could be used by other people. So this was this was a quite, wouldn't say planned, but it was a quite structured approach to it all. And then what happened was they said, well, we can't make all these decisions in Beijing. It was also a bit of a trap, like you try to sit up there and sort of imagine what you're going to do down here. It's like it's hopeless. Instead, they created this decentralized structure where all the provinces and cities and districts and counties, they made the decisions. So in order for them to make decisions, they had to have some resources. So we basically gave them a lot of land. So we rezoned all this agricultural land as urban land. It was a massive thing. It happened all at once. In 5 years, China quadrupled the land area. So that gave all these guys a chance to use their land for something. And what they did, of course, was they went out and they tried to do deals. They tried to compete with each other for the prize of growing the fastest. And they absorbed a lot of people who happened to be in that land when they got it. And then they had migrants. Migration has been a part of this, and migration which was, quote, unplanned. In the sense, nobody told these people to go there. They were not moved there. They went. And often they went illegally. In the sense, they don't have, the right to live there.
With a house register system.
No hukou, no residence permit. And so technically, if police run into you on the street and say, hey, where's your hukou? And you don't have one, well, you back on the bus, go back to the village. But that doesn't happen because these people essentially are low-cost resources. And so, yes, I think it's a problem, but it's the way this thing got started. And now we're in a new phase. Now we're in a different part of that where that's no longer really acceptable. It doesn't also provide the same kind of economic benefit as it used to, in a sense, like, this kind of arbitrage on low-cost labor is not really what's going to drive the next wave of economic growth for Shanghai or Wuhan. I mean, maybe it still works out in Tier 4 Ningxia or something, but it's not what you want if you want to have a successful city. You don't want just low-cost migrant labor to run around. You want to have people who are skilled and trained and can do high-tech stuff and can invent things and pay taxes. So those are all. So now we're in that phase.
That's a great point. I haven't thought about it from the flown of population aspect and also the scale of Chinese urban development. I think it's unforeseen in other cities to some extent.
Well, India's doing it now. We're right in the middle of that, or just getting started on the Indian version of all of this, which is going to be very Indian, and I wouldn't try to compare it all. The only thing I can say is that the commonality across all sort of emerging markets that achieve some level of success over time is savings rates. So as soon as you get to about a 20% savings rate, 20% of your income, median household income goes into the bank or somewhere, then bank usually. That generates the investment potential. And
yeah,
then
that's
you can
true.
start making progress because you invest in things that make the society more productive, people get employed, profits get made, taxes get gathered, you reinvest it into the economy, and it sort of grows like that. So that is what urbanization does for us. It allows the farmers to take their money out of the ground, into their pocket, over to the bank, and then reinvest in something else.
Yeah, and that's why we're here in Pudong, which used to be a really small village area, right? But now it's a well-developed kind of cosmopolitan area. So
Amazing.
that's amazing. Yeah. I'm going to move on to a larger global question. So China is also involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And it has major force in shaping, I think, urban and infrastructure projects across various countries along the Belt and Road Initiative. And then, in your assessment, what are the long-term implications of these Belt and Road Initiative projects, local urban landscapes in these countries, and what are the political dynamics behind them?
Well, I mean, I first of all think that Belt and Road Initiative, I guess, I mean, I'm not part of it. I never worked in it, and you know, I've done projects that have been affected by it, let's say that. From my understanding, the Belt and Road Initiative essentially is China's foreign policy. Every country has one, that's theirs. And it is intended to support the goals and aspirations of the Chinese government, and you know, however that's framed. That's what that is. It's, you know, it looks big, but I would argue that in the scale of global infrastructure investment, it's actually not a very big number. We spend globally, how much? Oh, it's in the trillions, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 trillion dollars a year on infrastructure around the world, everything from roads and bridges to municipal buildings. And, you know, the Belt and Road's in the billions. So, you know, it's less than 0 point something percent. So that is not a big number. Now, for a given country, it can be a big number. And so, with, you know, if you're sitting in Sri Lanka or something and that, you know, you see China coming at you, you can think it's a big number. I think that's the question. It's like, to what extent has that investment been productive? How has it resulted in meeting the expectations of whatever it had at the beginning? And my general feel is like, you know, now we're 10 years into it or something like that. And there's certainly been some impact. I would, you know, but there was a study, an Oxford study, as I recall, on Chinese infrastructure, and sort of comparing the quality of the results and the economics and everything to other people's infrastructure, and they found basically it's roughly the same.
Okay.
So, you know, a third of it is pretty much disastrous, a third of it is okay, and a third of it works. You know, it's usual cost overruns, and people not doing the right things, and sometimes you get everything to work together, but infrastructure is like that. So I think it's certainly had an impact, and what I think the biggest impact, I think, is the fact that now you have the second largest economy in the world saying, hey, we want to do some stuff outside of our economy. And everyone else has to then sort of think about whether they're going to respond to that or not. Notably, the first largest economy in the world. Yeah, I mean, I think that if it doesn't turn into you know, there are two ways to compete, I think. One is to run faster, and the other one is to try to trip the other guy. And so as long as we're not in a tripping contest, or not so much, and we balance those two things, and we try to run faster, and we try to make better projects, because I think then hopefully this will turn out to be ultimately not a bad thing. So let's see.
And also, it's kind of my curiosity, because we've been talking about infrastructure overseas, China building industrial parks, beautiful ones with the specific Chinese aesthetics being grandiose and everything. But on the other hand, as a literature person, I've been thinking about how these projects would have impact on increasing, for instance, China's soft power overseas. So as an urban scholar to some extent, how do you see the relationship between infrastructure constructions and the soft power kind of impact? Are they closely linked, or they are tangentially related? Well,
it's a form of integration. I mean, especially the way China does it. In a sense, if you want Chinese infrastructure, typically you will also get 10,000 Chinese workers showing up. It's quite vertically integrated, and China does not play well with others in that sense. If you look at China's standards, its supply chains, its you know, obviously its language, very usually, they won't be translated. So, yeah, obviously it becomes, it has the potential certainly to be neo-colonial in nature. But you have to look at the results and see where is it working or where has it delivered what it was expected to do and where has it not. And I would argue that it's less a function of China and more a function of the quality of governance in wherever the China investment was going. We hear things about some places that, well, we don't hear about Chinese investment destroying the port of Piraeus in Greece, though maybe the Greece ecosystem is better than I think it is, but it's okay. And in a sense, like there was governance. But we do hear about, Sri Lanka. And it's like, okay, well, that was a mistake. But I'm not sure the Chinese really wanted to have a bankrupt airport. I'm not sure that was the goal. So why would that be a good idea? So yeah, I would think that this quality of the local ecosystem, because China is, in a sense, investing outside of its borders. It's not, so it's soft power, yes, in a sense, like, people sort of see China there and there's more awareness of China. But whether it works or it doesn't work is not really a function of China. It's really much more a function of the recipient country or place and whether or not they have the capacity to utilize this investment in a productive way. And if they do not, then this does not help China's soft power. This turns into a disaster. So I think at that stage, it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for. If you are China and sort of saying, I want to project soft power by infrastructure. And it's like, well, then you fail. So that didn't help.
And it's also out of my imagination because I've been asked about what Belt and Road Initiative is, and what does it mean for China to have this project. I know that it's not directly related to your areas of expertise, but I'm curious about your definition and general understanding of Belt and Road Initiative. And from your consulting experience and being an urban scholar, if you were given the chance to work on a project, what kind of would it be to be more efficient? What would it be to be more fun and interesting and maybe helpful in building up China's soft power? But it's kind of like speculative question.
Well, no, I mean, it's helpful, I think, for people to sort of understand. I mean, first of all, there is no such thing as a BRI project. There's no list of these are the BRI projects that's coming out from the Chinese government saying these are the BRI projects. There are lists of these are projects that are funded by the China Development Bank International, or these are the projects that are funded by the Silk Road Fund, or blah, blah, blah. Nobody said those are BRI projects. And BRI, my understanding, is China's foreign policy. It's what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs comes out and says, here, this is the BRI policy. We support these kinds of projects. And is this one of those projects? No, we don't know. We don't have that list, and we don't make a list. We don't have a map. It's not something we do because, in a sense, they are trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to take credit for everything positive that possibly happens in these parts of the world and not be held accountable for anything that actually fails. And so that's the way you do that. So I would say this definitional question is something that we should be just mindful of. And yeah, of course, it's a way in the eyes of some people in Beijing, it's a way of projecting influence. Yeah, but as I said, you can fail, in which case your influence was a mistake, and that doesn't help you. So yeah, I'm not sure that's all that helpful. What I find on BRI, the projects that make a difference are the ones that actually do what they say they were going to do, not necessarily building a big football stadium or something, but turning the lights on, building power, infrastructure, water treatment. Sometimes in the Chinese model of sort of integrating industry with residential, with commercial, this type of a park, it can make a big difference in a place. It can be an anchor for that all. But it takes talent and it takes governance and it takes a real long-term mindset. So we won't really know whether or not these things are actually helping, for years, if not decades. So I think it's a bit too early to tell on all of that. And again, it's a drop in the bucket. Most of these most projects have to be funded by the countries themselves, largely through debt, which they are working in a global syndicated capital environment. So yeah, you sort of look at this and say, well, China can be a little bit of this answer. There's no way it can actually solve your whole problem. So up to the country to figure out how to best use that capital in which areas and places. Oh, well, yeah, one more thought. BRI is supposed to be a two-way street.
So, that's true.
It's a road, right? It goes in both directions. So it shouldn't just be about pushing things out. It should be also about bringing things in. If I was to highlight one thing that is really not yet happening in a way which needs to happen more, if in theory China is supposed to be actually supporting China's these emerging regions, these along the Belt and Roads, then it should be importing more from them. And it should be helping them to export to China. China's basic value proposition for these countries is it can buy their stuff, and they're not doing that.
Yeah.
They're not doing enough of it. Imports are, stable to declining from most places, and China's basically, not investing in creating an opportunity for the people of Ethiopia or whoever to kind of like enter the Chinese marketplace. And that is, it's not happening, and it's not helping as a result.
Interesting. So I've been thinking about these BRI projects, and I've been thinking about the aesthetics of Chinese urban development, infrastructure styles and everything, and also the great rejuvenation and the utopian vision of everything. And it goes back to, not exactly the same, but it goes back to what you talked about in your talk, how to live better, right? How to build a better cities, how to build a better connected world, something like that, right? I've been thinking about the role of McKinsey or other consulting firms. So I don't know if they have been, because Nanjing Road is such a good example. So if in a larger scale, consulting firms and people have visions like you could be involved in the process of this more cross-border kind of corporations, infrastructure development, it might be better. And also I've read your article on hybrid cities, which is really interesting. And I think it will be interesting to see if China's infrastructure overseas could be more hybrid instead of being just with a single purpose. But do you think consulting firms and more actors could be involved in this process? And if their involvement could give these projects better directions to follow instead of the foreign policy type of idea on how China's going to be integrated into these projects?
Well, I think it's part of this next phase of development for China. Instead if China actually wants to benefit from being part of global commons, it has to take some steps to become more, easy to work with. China, as I said, generally does not play well with others, and the challenge is language, culture, mindset. China's had a unique scale and pace of development, and so Chinese companies, as a result, behave very idiosyncratically. So everything is done on WeChat. Meetings happen sort of like instantaneously based on who you ran into that morning at breakfast. That's a problem if you're sitting in Ethiopia, because you're not part of that. I mean, you try to wake up at 3 a.m. when somebody calls you, but it's not. You're not local. You're exactly the same problem as we talk about for multinationals coming into China. Chinese multinationals and Chinese companies have the same thing when they're trying to sort of explore the brighter world. So yes, that open nature of an ecosystem would be a good thing. And I like to think that they can start doing that. Now, whether it's consultants or philanthropic organizations, decades ago I wrote something related to China's public agricultural research and bringing that into Africa, because the reality was that if you give the Ministry of Foreign Affairs the responsibility to manage an agricultural investment, they're going to make a disaster out of it. So that's not what they do. So clearly you need to have others involved who do know something about the country, the place, the industry, and all that. And and bringing people from the Ministry of Agriculture sitting in Henan to, in Mauritania. It's like, well, maybe, but, it's not clear to me that that's going to help either. So on your cities example, I mean, I think that in some ways, infrastructure is one of the more transferable things. I mean, to some extent, a tunnel is a tunnel is a tunnel. And what's not a tunnel is the contracting and the procurement process and how this thing gets built by the labor policies. Those are not tunnels. Those are other things that you need to be able to integrate. But the tunnel that's the same thing. So we know what it looks like. So there's some level of, okay, well, that part we can probably guarantee it got done. Did it get used in the right way? Did it get built in the right way? Not too clear. So yeah, I mean, I would always sort of think to myself that the most successful part of BRI, to the extent that I want to sort of try to guess, we did this project on the Lion and the Dragon, sort of looking at research on how Chinese investment was going into Africa. And what we found was the vast majority of the investment, and particularly the majority of the successful investment, was private sector. It was just individuals who are going small scale. Some guy rocks up and does a construction equipment dealership. And then decides that he wants to do a trading company for steel pipes because he's using them in replacement parts, and then invests in some kind of real estate, and then has a farm next to the real estate, and all of a sudden he's a little mini conglomerate. So that's the successful version of a BRI, and then gets married to a local girl and has a big family, and all of a sudden now you have a society going on, and you have a Chinese. That actually has happened before. That was when the Taiwanese left China, when Kuomintang left China in the 49. A fair number of them went to Nigeria and set up textile mills there. Okay. And that was the basis for the Nigerian textile industry, was these Kuomintang people setting up these things. So now we're in the next wave of that, essentially. So.
Interesting. So investing in private sectors instead of these state-controlled, state-owned enterprises might be.
Well, the state has dominance in some sectors, so big, heavy things, so power grids. But even there, I would generally say competitive state enterprises is something of an oxymoron. That you should not expect. That's not what they're there to do. They're not there to compete. They're there to provide security of supply. That's why we have them, in theory. And if they do compete, then they're competing based on their government relationships, not necessarily their commercial expertise. They might have some technical expertise because they provide security of supply. This is like a safe place to work. You don't get fired most of the time. But, competitive? Not sure.
Yeah. So the last question is about what would be the most exciting project in your imagination, or you're currently doing, that is about China and China in the global world, the global sphere, or some urban studies, urban development project?
Well, I can say what I wish. I think that urban development is, if you will, a meta technology. It's a technology of technologies. It's a way in which we accelerate the development of all the other things, because essentially a city, an urban environment, is one where you have a high frequency of high density interaction. So, and that proximity effect, having people together, thinking about things, accelerates progress. And so that's why we need urban development. And there are so many places in the world that need that. And I would argue one of the places that needs more of that quicker is, this might sound a little controversial, but is the United States. We need fundamentally to rethink and sort of accelerate our progress in our urban fabric. Our fabric is quite disconnected, and it's very difficult to see it. Now, China brings technologies, China brings cost structures, China brings energy and capital, which potentially could be deployed, but it has to be, again, it's not China's going to define success or failure. The local environment, whether it's Los Angeles, New York, or Atlanta, is going to be the place that makes that difference. So the most exciting project for me would be to work with a place that is bold enough, creative enough to say, I need to reimagine my urban fabric. And I will take the ideas from wherever they come. And I will take the technology from wherever it comes. And I will put it to work. And I will do what it takes to mobilize and build a consensus in a uniquely, in this case, American way. So I read a wonderful book a decade ago called Methland, The Death and Life of an American City. And it was about a small city in Midwest, which had gone through a massive period of industrial decline. So everybody left. So we were left with a big social problem. Lots of unemployment, lots of drug use and meth. But it was a hero story about the mayor who was like, okay, fine, we are where we are. Let's pull together. I find that inspiring. Those types of leaders, those types of opportunities to reimagine the setting. That's what I'm looking for in it now.
And I hope that you will get that chance as soon as possible.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much for having this conversation.
No,
Thanks.
Thank you.